Close your eyes and imagine a crown made of cold, heavy golden weight that rested not on one, but two royal heads belonging to a single woman who outlasted every king who tried to shadow her. Eleanor of Aquitaine, a name that feels like a secret whispered in a hollow stone hall. Tonight, we don't just tell her story. We drift through the empires she built, the crusades she led, and the quiet, strategic brilliance of a queen who refused to be forgotten. As the modern world fades, her world begins to breathe. She was perhaps the most enigmatic and formidable woman of the entire Middle Ages. To the history books, she was a queen, but to those who stood in her presence, she was a force of nature. Picture a woman who did not just wear one crown, but two first as the Queen of France, and then, in a move that shifted the very foundations of Europe, as the Queen of England. She was never a consort lost in the towering shadows of her husbands. Instead, she was the one who cast the shadow, ruling vast lands and leading armies into the sun-drenched dust of the crusade. Eleanor did not merely witness the unfolding of history. She was the architect who designed its path, outwitting monarchs with a grace as sharp as any blade. In an era where women were often expected to remain silent, she was being groomed to lead from her very first breath. Her legacy did not just fade with the passing of years. It shaped the royal houses of Europe for centuries, weaving a golden thread through the messy tapestry of civil war, political marriages, and courtly love. But we travel further into the mist of the past. Take this moment to truly settle in. Adjust your pillow, let your shoulders drop, and feel the weight of the day begin to lift. If you find peace in these stories, feel free to join our community here, letting us know what time it is for you, and where in the world you are drifting off from tonight. Now let the modern world dissolve entirely. The lights are dimming, the air is still, and our minds are ready to drift. We are leaving the present behind, traveling back through the centuries, past the crumbling cathedrals and silent ruins, until we reach the year 1122, the moment. Before we descend into the vibrant tapestries and towering stone halls of the 12th century, I want you to take a moment to truly inhabit the space you are in right now. Feel the weight of your body as it sinks into the surface beneath you. Perhaps you feel the gentle, consistent pressure of the blankets against your skin, or the cool air of the room touching your forehead. Let your hands rest naturally by your sides, palms open, releasing every bit of tension you've carried through the hours of this day. There is nothing left for you to do, no problems to solve, and no destination to reach other than this very moment of stillness. Imagine your body becoming heavy, rooted, and completely supported by the earth below. Take a slow, intentional breath in through your nose, feeling your chest and belly expand like a quiet tide coming in. As you exhale, imagine any lingering thoughts or worries drifting away like smoke in a calm evening breeze. The world outside your door is moving, spinning in its usual chaotic rhythm, but in here, time is beginning to slow down, stretching out into a long, peaceful horizon. Listen to the subtle layers of sound around you. Perhaps it is the distant hum of the city, the rustle of leaves against a window, or simply the soft, steady rhythm of your own breathing. Allow these sounds to become a protective barrier, a sanctuary that keeps the distractions of the modern world at bay. You are drifting into a place where only the past remains. It is important to remember that while the life we are about to explore is full of intrigue, power, and movement, this story is fundamentally designed to help you fade into rest. Sometimes our stories are too interesting, and we find that the mind stays too alert. Because of this, We are working on more monotonous rhythm, leaning into the slower, more repetitive cycles of history to better serve your sleep. If your mind begins to wander, or if you find yourself drifting off into a dream before the queen has even reached her throne, let it happen. You are not here to study or memorize. You are here to be carried. You have my full permission to lose the thread of the narrative, to miss the names, and to simply let the sound of my voice become a gentle, rhythmic hum in the background of your consciousness. A steady pulse that mirrors the quiet of the night. Now is the time to dim the lights entirely, ensuring that your surroundings are as dark and still as a castle chamber at midnight. If you prefer, turn on a fan for some soothing white noise, and let us prepare to cover the history we have for tonight together. Think of this narrative as a protective blanket, woven from the threads of ancient time, meant to keep your mind anchored in a place of safety while your body prepares for deep, restorative rest. The rhythm of the history we share will be your guide, moving at a pace that honors the silence. As you feel your muscles soften and your eyelids grow heavy with the weight of sleep, we begin to sink deeper into the cultural pulse of a world that existed long ago. We are leaving the noise of the present behind and entering a region that pulsed with its own unique ambition, wealth, and culture. We are drifting toward the year 1122, a time when a new life was about to enter a world of glittering courts and ancient laws. Can you feel the shift? The air is growing cooler, scented with the stone of old cathedrals and the damp earth of a distant medieval spring. We are arriving at the beginning, at the very moment Eleanor of Aquitaine entered the world, ready to witness the rise of an empire that would change everything. The journey has begun, and you are safe to drift. We now travel back across the long, sweeping curve of the centuries, leaving the echoes of the modern world far behind us, until we find ourselves in a land that feels more like a golden dream than a mere history. It is the year 1122, and the air of the Aquitaine region is thick, heavy with the sweet, floral scent of a medieval spring, and the quiet, steady pulse of a civilization that is both ancient and vibrantly alive. Picture a world where wealth is not just measured in heavy gold coins, but in the staggering vastness of the horizon. Eleanor was not born into just any noble house. She was the daughter of William X, the legendary Duke of Aquitaine, a man whose realm was so immense, so lush, and so powerful that it rivaled the majesty of the French crown itself. Imagine standing on a high, stone balcony in the warm afternoon sun, looking out over an inheritance that stretched from the gentle, shimmering banks of the Loire River, all the way to the jagged, blue-tinted peaks of the Pyrenees. This was her world, a vast tapestry of rolling vineyards, deep and ancient forests, and bustling market towns that made her, from her very first breath, the most sought-after bride in all of Christendom. The ground beneath her feet was rich, her legacy was secure, and for a time, the world felt as though it could never change. The court of Poitiers, where Eleanor spent her formative, sun-drenched years, was a place of extraordinary light and sound. It was not the grim, dark fortress of war that many imagine when they think of the Middle Ages. Instead, it was a beacon of intellect, grace, and artistic ambition. While other noble children of her time might have been raised solely on the cold mechanics of land and inheritance, Eleanor was immersed in a world of complex poetry, deep philosophy, and the subtle dance of high politics. She was a child of the southern sun, growing up in a court that valued the sharpening of the mind just as much as the strength of the armored arm. Her father, a man of deep culture and refined taste, ensured that his daughter was never merely a pawn on a political chessboard, but a player who understood every move before it was even made. She was being groomed to lead, not from a position of forced silence, but from a foundation of deep, rigorous knowledge. As the sun set slowly over the high stone walls of the palace, casting long orange shadows across the courtyard, imagine Eleanor in the quiet, cool sanctuary of the court library. Unlike almost any other girl of her era, she was rigorously educated in subjects that were usually reserved only for the sons of kings. The smell of aged, heavy vellum and the rhythmic hypnotic scratch of a quill on parchment became the background music of her youth. She read the complex, flowing lines of Latin, understanding the heavy weight of classical texts that had survived the collapse of empires. She was well versed in the intricate music of the time, the heavy, dusty books of law, and the strategic, subtle art of diplomacy. To the young Eleanor, a map was not just a piece of dried leather. It was a living landscape of potential power and alliance. This intellect, this sharp, restless, and curious mind, was what truly set her apart from the world around her. It was a safe, quiet space of learning, a mental fortress that protected her. For a long time, within these shimmering, candlelit halls, something truly revolutionary was being born. Eleanor's court in Poitiers would later become famed for inventing and spreading the very ideals that we still associate with the Middle Ages, the timeless concepts of chivalry and romantic love. Imagine a room filled with the soft, flickering light of 1,000 beeswax candles, where poets, dreamers, and troubadours gathered from across the continent to share stories of honor, undying devotion, and noble sacrifice. It was here that the court of love was carefully cultivated, a romantic and intellectual game that celebrated the idea of a knight's refined, selfless devotion to a lady. It was a cultural movement that shifted the entire focus of society, moving away from the raw brutality of the battlefield and toward the refined grace of the great hall. In this safe, artistic sanctuary, the power of a well-chosen word began to outweigh the raw power of the sword, and Eleanor was at the very center of it all, the young muse, the sharp critic and the future mistress of a new social order. The atmosphere of the court was one of constant, rhythmic creativity. If you listen closely in your mind, you can almost hear the soft, melodic plucking of a lute echoing through the long, stone corridors. A sound that feels like a protective, velvet blanket against the deep silence of the night. Philosophy and poetry were not just hobbies in Poitiers. They were the very air the court breathed. Scholars and artists traveled from far-off lands just to walk through these shaded gardens, discussing the nature of justice, the movement of the stars, and the beauty of the human soul. Eleanor moved through this world with a natural quiet command, her intellect acting as a steady compass as she navigated the complex social dances of the elite. It was a true golden age of culture, a time when the mind was allowed to wander as freely as the winds across the vast Aquitaine plains. Everything felt stable, enduring, and beautifully ordered, as if the high walls of Poitiers could hold back the march of time itself. There's a sense of permanence here, a feeling that the music would never truly stop. But even in the most peaceful and beautiful sanctuaries, the heavy rhythm of history eventually begins to shift. As the year 1037 approached, the teenage Eleanor was no longer just a child of art and music. She was a leader in waiting, her spirit hardened by the strategic lessons of her tutors and the weight of her future responsibility. She had been raised in the glittering golden light, but she was being prepared for the long shadows that were beginning to stretch across her path. The transition from the safety of the schoolroom to the crushing weight of the throne was coming, a shift that would occur with a suddenness that no amount of poetry or philosophy could ever fully prepare her for. Her father, while on a sacred pilgrimage to Santiago de Compostela, fell ill and died with a suddenness that sent immediate shockwaves through every corner of the realm. The news traveled slowly, carried by weary riders, but when it arrived, the golden age of her youth vanished in an instant. In that single quiet moment of grief, the world of the young girl changed forever. At just 15 years old, Eleanor became the Duchess of Aquitaine, inheriting a title that gave her direct command over nearly a third of what we now know as France. The gentle poetry of her youth was suddenly replaced by the cold iron of proclamations, and the soft music of the lute was joined by the heavy, rhythmic tread of armored men in the courtyards. As a young girl ruling one of Europe's richest and most coveted territories, she could not remain unprotected or unwed for long in a world built for kings. Her guardians, recognizing the extreme vulnerability of her position, wasted no time in arranging her future, moving pieces across the map with clinical efficiency. Within mere months, she was married to Louis, the heir to the French throne, a political match engineered with cold precision to bring her vast, sun-drenched lands under royal control. The lights of Poitiers were slowly fading in her rear view as she prepared to travel north toward the somber, devout, and gray court of Paris. The safe, glittering world of her youth was officially over, and the stage was being set for a life that would upend every tradition and challenge the very kings she was meant to serve. The journey into the dark heart of power was beginning, and the young duchess was ready to step out of the golden shadows of her father, brilliant light of her own making. We follow her now, leaving the warmth of the south, as she travels toward a throne that she will soon make her own. I understand, to reach the 15-0 character threshold for a 20-25-minute deep sleep segment, I will expand the sensory world building, focusing on the rhythmic nature of the travel and the atmospheric stillness of Eleanor's imprisonment. Section 4. Crusades and Crowns in the year 1047. A monumental event began to stir the very air of Europe, sending long, low ripples of anticipation through the quiet stone corridors and the high vaulted cathedrals where our story resides. The launch of the Second Crusade had been proclaimed, a call that echoed across the continent, urging the kings of the West to take up the cross and reclaim the ancient, sun-scorched cities of the East. King Louis VII, a man of deep and somber devotion, felt the weight of this sacred duty pulling at his spirit, and he answered the call with a heavy, prayerful fervor. But what truly sent a shockwave through the courts of Christendom was not the king's vow. It was the stunning revelation that his queen, Eleanor of Aquitaine, would not be staying behind in the safety of Paris. She would join him on this grueling journey into the vast, shimmering unknown. Imagine the heavy rhythmic thud of thousands of horses' hooves as the procession began its long march south. This was no mere symbolic pilgrimage of prayer. Eleanor did not travel as a passenger or a passive observer, tucked away in a gilded carriage. Instead, she arrived with the full weight of her own authority, bringing with her hundreds of loyal knights and vassals from her vast southern lands in Aquitaine, pledging their strength and their steel to the cause. Even more unusual, and to the chroniclers of the time, utterly scandalous, was the sight of the queen herself leading a group of noble women, all dressed in functional, polished armor, riding their horses alongside the men, with a spirit that left the witnesses of that age aghast. These chroniclers whispered of Amazons, accusing the queen of turning a holy war into a grand, glittering parade of vanity. Yet Eleanor remained undeterred, her eyes fixed on the distant, dusty horizon, her spirit buoyed by the prospect of a world far larger than the grey walls of the French court. The journey was a slow, hypnotic march that stretched on for months, a rhythmic passage that took them through the rolling green fields of France, into the deep, whispering forests of Germany, across the endless plains of Hungary, and finally into the rocky, ancient and unforgiving terrain of Asia Minor. As the great army moved deeper into the east, the landscape began to shift in a way that felt like a slow motion. The air grew thick and dry, and the sun became a relentless, golden weight. They entered a world of blazing heat and treacherous mountain passes, the jagged peaks of Anatolia, which began to drain the morale and the lifeblood of even the strongest warriors. The horses grew weary, their breath heavy in the thin mountain air. Food became a rare luxury. Disease began to creep through the crowded ranks, and the failure of King Louis's hesitant, prayerful leadership became increasingly apparent in the face of devastating losses. It was a failure of command, and in the quiet of the night, Eleanor was never afraid to speak the truth of what she saw. However, amidst the dust and the despair, Eleanor found a brief, shimmering sanctuary in the city of Antioch. There, she sought refuge with her uncle, Raymond of Poitiers, a charismatic and brilliant prince who ruled the city with a refined, cosmopolitan grace. In Raymond's court, Eleanor felt a rare sense of intellectual ease, a return to the culture of her youth. She spent long, late nights in deep conversation, moving through gardens scented with jasmine and citrus, far from the somber, restrictive atmosphere of her husband's camp. These meetings, conducted in the cool shadows of the Antioch night, sparked fierce whispers of an improper closeness. Rumors of an affair spread like wildfire across the camps, and whether these tales were true or merely the product of political jealousy, they drove a permanent wedge between the royal couple, a crack in their union that could never be repaired. The tension between Eleanor's soaring ambition and Louis' demand for quiet, pious obedience became intolerable as they finally turned their weary, sunburned faces back toward the west. They returned from a failed crusade with their marriage already in fragments. The personalities and the ambitions of the two rulers were now worlds apart, no longer able to occupy the same space. By the year 1152, the union was officially dissolved by the church, citing a blood relation as the formal excuse. Eleanor walked away with her pride, her titles, and her vast southern lands entirely intact, but she was never a woman to remain in the shadows. Within mere months of her annulment, she made a move that would alter the geopolitical fate of Europe forever. She married a young, bold, and fiercely ambitious duke named Henry of Anjou. This scandal was not just a personal choice, it was an earthquake of power. Henry was 11 years her junior, a man already carving a brilliant and bloody path toward the English throne. When he ascended as King Henry II in 154, Eleanor became the Queen of England, uniting her massive Aquitaine holdings with the English crown to create what we now call the Angevin Empire. Imagine a single empire stretching from the cold, grey mists of Scotland all the way down to the sun-drenched Pyrenees. France was suddenly surrounded by a power centered on Eleanor herself, who held lands that even her new, powerful husband did not control outright. For a time, they were a formidable team, a partnership of intellect and iron. Together, they raised a dynasty of ambitious sons, and Eleanor wielded real political authority, often ruling as regent in Henry's stead while he was away on campaign. She moved between the English and French courts with a graceful, practiced command, and her own court in Poitiers became a legendary beacon of art, music, and the high ideals of chivalry. Imagine the rhythmic, soothing atmosphere of these great halls, where the intricate concept of courtly love was meticulously cultivated. It was an intellectual and romantic game that celebrated noble suffering and refined devotion, filling the rooms with the soft, melodic sound of poetry and the gentle, repetitive plucking of lutes. In this world, Eleanor was the sovereign of hearts and minds. Yet, even as she presided over this golden age of medieval culture, her marriage to Henry began to sour under the crushing weight of his ruthlessness and his legendary public affair. Henry was a tireless ruler, brilliant but often cruel and dismissive, and as the years passed, Eleanor found herself increasingly sidelined from the heart of power. She was no longer a young duchess dazzled by the promise of the world. She was a queen who had defied kings and led armies across continents, and she would not accept a life of quiet submission. By the 1000 alliance that had once defined an empire had withered into a state of deep, cold bitterness and distrust. Eleanor, once the jewel of the realm, began to feel like a prisoner in her own court, watched and restricted by the man she had helped elevate. She watched as her sons, Henry, Richard, Geoffrey, and John, grew into restless, ambitious men, and she realized that if her husband would not respect her power, she would find a way to defy him through the only force he truly feared, his own heirs. In 173, Eleanor made her most dangerous move yet, encouraging her sons to rise in armed rebellion against their father. She forged alliances, forged letters, and mobilized armies across the continent, but the rebellion eventually crumbled under Henry's swift and brutal response. Eleanor, attempting to flee her own lands in disguise, was captured by her husband's men. She was taken to Henry's court, stripped of her authority, and placed under immediate permanent house arrest. For the next 16 years, this woman of the world would live in a state of quiet confinement, move from castle to castle, under constant, watchful guard. No trials were held, no titles were officially stripped, but her freedom was gone. The crown she wore, once a symbol of her soaring, limitless ambition, had become a fortress of its own, a cold, stone enclosure that kept her from the world she had once commanded. In the long silence of her arrest, however, Eleanor's spirit did not break. She endured, she waited, she watched from her high stone windows as her sons continued to battle their father and each other, knowing that the balance of power would eventually shift once again. She knew that time was the one thing even the most powerful king could not conquer, and in that silence, moving through the quiet rhythm of the days and the long, still nights, she prepared herself for a final chapter that would restore her to a power no one saw coming. As the mists of history begin to settle around these years of stone and shadow, we feel the stillness of the walls around her, a quiet sanctuary where she remained, patient and unbroken, waiting for the world to turn. The journey through the dust of the East and the glittering, loot-filled halls of Poitiers now rests in the deep, rhythmic memory of the past, as Eleanor drifts into a long, watchful sleep within the fortress of her own legacy. We leave her there for a moment, in the quiet of the 1180s, as the focus of our story begins to shift from the woman to the very stones that witnessed her era. For the history of a queen is often written in the foundations of the palaces she left behind. We are drifting now, moving away from the mists of England and toward the heart of Paris, where another fortress is rising from the riverbank, a place that will one day hold the very treasures Eleanor helped inspire. The queen is waiting in her tower, and as she sleeps, we watch the stones of the Louvre begin to take shape in the darkness. Centuries before the gentle, enigmatic gaze of the Mona Lisa ever met the eyes of a curious tourist beneath the soft, filtered museum lights, the Louvre was something else entirely. It was a silent, heavy fortress of stone and shadow, built for the cold necessity of defense rather than the beauty of display. Imagine the Paris of the late 12th century, a city far smaller, more fragile, and more intimate than the sprawling metropolis we know today. In those days, the western frontier of the city lay exposed to the winds and the whispers of enemies, needing a grim, steadfast protector to stand watch along the river's edge. It was around the year 190 that King Philip II of France, a man deeply anxious about the English threats looming from the west, the very empire that Eleanor of Aquitaine had helped to solidify, ordered the construction of a powerful stronghold along the banks of the Seine. What rose from the damp riverbank was not a palace of grace or a gallery of light, but a military outpost that was thick, grim, and utterly impenetrable. This early version of the Louvre was anchored by a massive, circular keep central tower reaching 30 meters into the grey Parisian sky, casting a long, intimidating shadow over the slow-moving waters of the river. It was surrounded by high, imposing curtain walls, sharp watchtowers, and a broad, dry moat that served as a deep, silent scar between the fortress and the world outside. There was no beauty intended in these walls. They were purely practical, made of cold, rough-hewn stone with narrow, vertical arrow slits and heavy, iron-reinforced gates designed to keep the chaos of the world at bay. Beneath the fortress, far below the reach of the warm sun, secret tunnels and storage chambers were carved directly into the ancient bedrock, dark, cool corridors meant for moving silent supply, hiding weary troops, or providing a stealthy midnight escape during the long, suffocating days of the siege. If you listen closely in the silence of your room, you can almost feel the dampness of that stone, the way the sound of footsteps would have been swallowed by the heavy air of the earth. Some historians believe that even now, these ancient, secret tunnels may still lie buried and forgotten, hidden beneath the modern, bustling streets of Paris, waiting in the dark. For centuries, this medieval beast loomed over the Seine like a sleeping guardian, quietly watching as the kingdom of France shifted and grew around its feet. But as the years turned into decades and then into slow centuries, the military purpose of the fortress began to fade away into the mist of the past. Paris expanded far beyond its original medieval walls. The city grew safer, and the kings of France no longer felt the need for a garrison in the heart of their own capital. By the 1500s, the once mighty fortress was considered outdated, yet it remained a place of immense quiet potential. The Renaissance kings, with their grand visions of sophistication and artistic elegance, no longer wanted thick battlements and grim, defensive towers. They wanted sweeping, sunlit halls, ornate galleries, and lush, manicured gardens. The Louvre stood in the perfect location by the rhythmic flow of the river, in the heart of the city and at the very center of power, and so it began in a slow, magnificent reinvention. The transformation did not happen in a single night, but rather through a gradual, patient process where the old fortress was slowly dismantled, reshaped, and incorporated into new royal plans. Yet, the bones of that original medieval beast never fully disappeared. In the late 20th century, during a massive period of renovation, workers unearthed something remarkable deep beneath the polished floors and marble stairs of the museum. The buried base of Philip's original tower, cold, gray, and almost perfectly intact. Today, Visitors can leave the bright light of the galleries behind and descend into the Louvre's cool basement to stand among those very same stones that once guarded the city's silent sentinel from a much darker, heavier time. In this quiet, underground space, the polished elegance of the modern museum gives way to raw, weathered stone that remains untouched by the centuries of renovation, happening just a few feet above. Here, the ghosts of the fortress still linger, whispering of a time when the world was measured in the thickness of stone and the depth of a moat. As the kings eventually left these halls behind, moving their court to the distant, sprawling grandeur of Versailles, the Louvre began to find its true identity as a haven for art and the human spirit. Its role as a center of raw royal power ended, and the long halls grew quiet, waiting for a new kind of beauty to fill the void. And while the monarchs of the West were busy building and then abandoning their stone towers far across the world, in a different land and an even deeper time, another kind of guardian was waiting in the absolute darkness of the earth. We move now from the stone fortresses of Paris toward a much older, more profound silence, leaving behind the kings of Europe to find an army that has never moved, never breathed, and never failed in its eternal walk. Beyond the galleries and the riverbanks, another story is waiting to be uncovered, where the ambition of a single man created an entire world that would stay hidden for over 2,000 years. The queen in her tower and the kings in their palaces have faded, and we now descend into the quiet dust of an ancient empire, where thousands of faces are waiting to meet us in the still, dark earth. In the quiet, parched spring of 1974, just outside the ancient city of Wenmen, China's Shaanxi province, a small group of farmers was digging a well during a period of intense drought. As their iron tools struck deep into the heavy, sun-baked earth, they expected to find the cool, life-giving relief of water. But instead, their blades hit something hard, hollow, and utterly unyielding. It was not the bedrock of the earth, but fired clay. At first, the soil yielded only fragments, a broken torso, a pair of hollow arms, and then a face began to stare back at them through the layers of dark, centuries-old soil. It was a life-sized face, hauntingly real and unnervingly present, appearing as if it were a spirit emerging from a 2,000-year sleep. The farmers had no way of knowing, in that still afternoon, that they had just stumbled upon one of the most extraordinary archaeological wonders. As the excavations slowly expanded, the earth began to give up its secrets, revealing row after row of clay soldiers emerging from their subterranean slumber, frozen in time for over 2 millennia. Imagine yourself now, standing on the very edge of these vast, silent excavation pits. You are looking down into a world of absolute, breathtaking stillness. Below you, thousands of soldiers stand in precise, rhythmic military formation, as if they are waiting for a command that was whispered 20 centuries ago and then forgotten. The scale of this silent army is staggering, reaching far beyond what the eye can take in at once. Yet it is the minute, repetitive detail that truly captures the wandering mind. Each soldier is unique. As your eyes move slowly across the ranks, you see that no two faces are exactly alike. There are thousands of them, each one crafted with a level of individuality that feels almost impossible to the modern imagination. Look closely at the first row, standing in the dim, protective light of the museum canopy. Here, a soldier stands with a wide jaw and curled lips, his expression one of solemn, heavy readiness. Beside him is another warrior with narrow, contemplative eyes and a thin, thoughtful brow, looking out into the darkness with a quiet, eternal patience. Their hairstyles are intricate and varied, with hair braided, knotted, and coiled in styles that reflect their specific military rank and the distant, rugged regions of the empire they once called home. You can see the fine individual rivets on their overlapping armor, the delicate, carved clasps on their robes, and the way their clay hands are still curled to hold weapons that have long since vanished into the mist of time. Some stand tall with a commanding regal presence, while others crouch in a low attack stance that they have held, without moving a single inch for over 2,000 years. In Pit 1, the largest and most awe-inspiring of these underground chambers, the infantry units stretch out over 750 feet in length. Row after row, foot soldier after foot soldier, they stand in the same rigid military order used during the reign of the first emperor. There are archers kneeling in quiet readiness, their bodies tensed in a perpetual focus. There are cavalrymen standing faithfully beside their clay horses, the animals crafted with startling, lifelike realism, their ears pricked as if they are listening for a distant, ghostly trumpet call that only they can hear. The deeper you look into these ranks, the more the repetition begins to soothe and anchor the mind. It is a loop of stone, clay, and history. A soldier, then a horse, a commander, then a charioteer. The sheer weight of their eternal watchfulness creates a heavy canopy of calm over the entire site. They are not merely cold statues, they are spirits captured in clay, each one a testament to an army that never breathes, yet never wavers in its duty. They have stood in this absolute velvet darkness for 2 millennia, shielded from the wind, the rain, and the burning sun, bearing the immense, silent weight of the soil on their cracked shoulders. They have been waiting in the dark for a remembrance that has finally arrived. Originally, this army was not the plain, earthy clay-brown color we see today. When they were first fired in the ancient kilns, they were painted in vivid, brilliant, and startling colors: deep reds, bright blues, rich greens, and even shades of lavender. Imagine, for a moment, the sight of 8,000 soldiers shimmering in the flickering torchlight of the underground vaults, their colorful uniforms providing a vibrant, breathing contrast to the gray stone walls. Though these pigments faded almost the very instant they were exposed to the modern air, the memory of that original brilliance remains like a ghost in the sight. It is a hidden layer of beauty that only adds to the profound awe of their silent, enduring presence. They were built to be seen by no one but the dead, a masterpiece of logistical planning and state-level resources, executed with a single, terrifying, and deeply human purpose. As the shadows in the pits grow longer and the air remains still, we begin to realize that this was not art for art's sake. This was a logistical vision of eternity, a dream made manifest in the heavy soil. This was the work of a ruler whose ambition reached beyond the limits of a human life, creating a world that could exist without the need for light or breath. The soldiers continue their watch, row after row, their clay eyes seeing a world that no longer exists above them. They are the guardians of a secret that has been kept for over 2,000 years, and as we stand among them in our minds, we feel the same eternal patience beginning to settle within ourselves. The modern world is far away now, and here, in the quiet heart of the earth, there is only the rhythm of the ranks and the silence of the clay. We pause here, amidst the thousands of unique faces and the still clay horses, letting the sheer scale of this watchfulness fill our senses. The army remains, standing in their long, dark corridors. And as we prepare to move deeper into the secrets of their creator, we carry their silence with us. The soldiers are ready, and so are we. As we drift toward the center of this buried kingdom, toward the tomb of the man who commanded the earth itself to stand still. As we move deeper into the heart of this very kingdom, leaving the thousands of silent clay soldiers behind in their long, dark corridors, our journey takes us toward the very center of this ancient mystery. At the core of the Terracotta Army site lies a single, massive, tree-covered mound, a hill that appears quite ordinary from a distance, rising like a natural landmark against the Shaanxi sky. But beneath that quiet green surface rests the unexcavated tomb of Emperor Qin, Shi Huang himself, a place that has remained untouched and unseen for over 2,000 years. It is a buried universe, a subterranean palace of absolute stillness, waiting in the absolute darkness of the earth. To understand why such a world was created, we must look into the heart of the man who commanded it. Shi Huang was a ruler whose ambition was matched only by his profound, haunting fear of the end. Born in 259 BCE, he rose from a young prince to a king, eventually becoming the first emperor of a unified China. He was the architect of a nation, standardizing currency, language, and the very roads his subjects traveled. But even as he unified the world above, he was obsessed with the world below. He feared the silence of death, and throughout his life, he sought the secret to immortality, sending expeditions in search of legendary elixirs and consulting with mystics who promised eternal life. Ironically, the very potions he consumed in his quest for immortality's strange mixtures, laced with mercury, may have been the very thing that hastened his departure from the world of the living. He died at just 49 years old, still searching for a way to escape time. But while his flesh perished, his vision did not. Around the time he declared himself emperor, construction began on a tomb complex so massive it would take nearly 4 decades and 700,000 laborers to complete. These workers, craftsmen, sculptors, prisoners, and forced laborers carved an entire kingdom out of the earth, a city of the dead designed to mirror the glory of the one he ruled in life. Historical accounts from the Han Dynasty describe the interior of this tomb as something otherworldly, a masterpiece of ancient imagination. Inside the sealed chamber, there are said to be replicas of palaces and towers, filled with rare artifacts and jewels. But it is the ceiling and the floor that truly capture the awe of the mind. The ceiling was reportedly encrusted with pearls and precious gems to mimic the shimmering night sky, and the celestial bodies above. Below this artificial heaven, the emperor ordered the creation of flowing rivers of mercury, designed to replicate the great waterways of China and simulate the geography of his vast empire. Imagine the profound stillness of that chamber, a sky of pearls shining down on a landscape of liquid silver rivers that never stop moving, yet never make a sound. It is a vision of a world frozen in time, a paradise crafted for a single man's afterlife. Soil tests around the mound have indeed revealed abnormally high levels of mercury, suggesting that the legends of these silver rivers are rooted in a staggering, heavy truth. This was not merely a monument. It was a response to the terror of being alone in the darkness of the underworld. The emperor intended to rule in death just as he had in life, surrounded by his ministers, his entertainers, and his lethal army. For over 2 millennia, this underground empire has remained sealed, protected by the very earth that holds it, and, some say, by automatic crossbows rigged to fire on any who dare to intrude. Why does it remain unopened? The reasons are a blend of respect and caution. Archaeologists fear that the technology to open the tomb without destroying its fragile contents, its ancient textiles, paintings, and organic relics, simply does not exist yet. They remember how the vibrant colors of the terracotta soldiers faded within mere hours of their exposure to the air, and they refuse to let the same fate befall the treasures of the central chamber. And so, the Emperor's final mission remains a secret, a quiet hill, guarding a buried universe that no one has seen since 210 BC. The builders who shaped this empire worked in a silence of their own, their names lost to the dust of history. Many were sealed within the complex upon its completion, to ensure that its secrets would never be whispered to the world above. Their legacy is not in stone, but in the enduring power of the Emperor's dream, a dream of eternity that transcends the reach of time. As we stand in our minds beside that quiet, tree-covered mound, we feel the weight of the centuries pressing down, a heavy blanket of earth and memory. The soldiers in the pits continue their eternal watch, row after row, their clay eyes seeing a darkness we cannot fathom. They are the guardians of a moment when one man believed he could take the entire world with him beyond the veil. And in building something meant to last forever, he created a legacy that now belongs to the entire world, a reminder of the human desire to be remembered, to be significant, and to find a place of peace in the long night of history. The imagery of the silver rivers begins to flow through our minds now, a rhythmic, shimmering current that carries us away from the dust of Xi'an and toward a different kind of ritual. We are moving away from the silence of the tomb and toward the open-air theaters of ancient Greece, where the voices of men and the myths of gods first met on a stage beneath the Mediterranean sky. The army is at rest, the rivers of Mercury are still, and as we drift, we prepare for the songs and the masks that first explored the drama of the human soul. We leave the first emperor in his paradise of pearls, drifting deeper into the quiet as the past continues to unfold its velvet wings around us. Long before any scripts were carefully written on heavy parchment or stages were constructed from aged timber, the very origins of theater in ancient Greece began deep within the dark, fertile soil of sacred religion. It was not born as mere entertainment for the passing masses, but as a profound, soul-stirring ritual, a sacred, living offering to the gods, and most specifically to Dionysus, the god of wine, fertility, and ecstatic, heart-deep transformation. To truly understand the beginning of this drama, you must picture yourself on a quiet, lonely hillside beneath an endless indigo sky, where communities once gathered not for a spectacle of bright lights, but for a deep and collective communion with the divine. In those earliest mist-shrouded days, people did not simply watch a performance from a safe distance. They participated in it with their entire being. During rural festivals, held in the wild honor of Dionysus, the air was filled with the rhythmic sounds of dancing, the scent of crushed grapes, and an ecstatic celebration that felt as old and as deep as the earth itself. At the very heart of these sacred gatherings were the dithyrambs, wild, passionate, and deeply rhythmic choral hymns sung by large groups of 50 men or young boys. These were not tame or quiet songs. They were powerful, resonant invocations that seemed to vibrate through the very ground beneath their feet. Imagine, if you can, 50 voices rising and falling in perfect heavy unison, creating a solid wall of sound that was both hypnotic and overwhelming to the senses. The singers moved together in a slow, rhythmic sway, chanting and invoking the presence of the god until the boundaries between the mortal and the divine began to blur and dissolve. It was a ritual meant to transport the soul, to unite the community through the shared ancient power of rhythm, voice, and perfectly synchronized movement. This was theater in its most primal rhythmic form, a collective prayer that sought to touch the heavy mystery of existence, through the endless repetition of song. As the centuries slowly turned like the stars above, these dithyrambic performances began to grow more structured. Though they never lost their sacred hypnotic core, the chants slowly started to incorporate elements of storytelling, weaving together ancient tales of the god Dionysus, his miraculous, lightning-born birth, his long, weary wanderings through distant and dusty lands, his immense suffering, and his ultimate, radiant joy. As these narratives became more complex, and the stories more detailed, a singular quiet moment of transformation occurred. A solo voice, a single brave performer, began to step out away from the safety of the collective chorus. This individual voice would engage in a direct, searching dialogue with the chorus, creating a new kind of tension, an emotional exchange that had never been seen in the world before. This bold innovation is often credited to a man named Thespis, a performer from the 6th century BCE, who is said to be the very first person to assume the role of an individual character in that single quiet act of stepping forward into the light. Thespis transformed a ritual of song into a drama of living action. He did not just sing about a god or a hero from the distant, fading past. Through the power of his voice and solitary presence, he became that god, that hero, or that mortal, caught in the tightening grip of a great and terrible conflict. From this quiet, humble beginning, theater emerged from the deep mists of religious tradition into something entirely distinct, a performed story with characters, deep, resonating emotion, and the heavy, inevitable weight of conflict. Yet even in this new form, Greek theater remained inseparable from the ancient act of worship. The stage was always considered a sacred space, a temple of the human condition, where the audience was not merely watching a play, but participating in a collective act of reverence, catharsis, and emotional release. As you drift now, deeper and deeper into the quiet of your own mind, imagine the vast open-air amphitheaters carved directly into the rocky, sun-warmed hillsides of Greece, always facing the endless sea or the vast open sky. The stone beneath you is cold and steady, the air is clear and sharp, and the gods themselves were believed to be watching from the very edge of the horizon. This was a place where human voices were amplified by the marble and the wind, where the many spoke as one, and where the individual was always part of a larger, grander design. The rhythm of the chorus, the swaying of the dancers, and the rising, sweet smoke of the ritual fire all work together to create a sanctuary of sound, a place where the noise of the modern world cannot reach you, and where the past remains in a state of eternal, rhythmic motion. The voices rise and fall, like the waves of a distant sea, carrying you further away from the present and deeper into the velvet shadows of history. As the drama continued to evolve on those ancient, sun-drenched hillsides, the individual performer needed a way to bridge the vast, echoing distance between himself and the thousands of spectators seated in the high marble tier. How could a single human face, small and fragile in the vastness of the amphitheater, express the immense cosmic grief of a fallen king or the wild, unpredictable mischief of a god to someone sitting in the very last row, hundreds of feet away? The answer was found in the ancient art of the mask, a tool of total transformation that was as much a sacred object as it was a piece of costume, crafted with patient care from lightweight, organic materials like fine linen, porous cork, or even thin, carved wood. These masks covered the entire face of the actor. They were designed with exaggerated, larger-than-life expressions that were meant to be read from a great distance. A wide, gaping mouth for eternal hollow sorrow, a sharply arched, fierce brow for uncontainable rage, or a subtle, knowing smirk for the clever mischief of a fool. Each mask was a distillation of a single, pure emotion, amplifying the character's internal world so that it could be felt by every single soul in the amphitheater. Because only a few actors typically played multiple roles in a single performance, the mask also allowed for a rapid, nearly magical shift in identity. One moment, a man was a powerful king, and the next, by simply changing his face in the shadows of the scheme, he became a messenger, a god, or a lowly slave. To wear a mask in the theater of Dionysus was not merely to pretend. It was to truly embody a spirit. The actor became a vessel, a sacred channel through which the myths and the messages of the ancestors could flow into the present moment. Behind the mask, the individual's own identity would fade and disappear, leaving only the pure essence of the character to speak through the wide, hollow mouth of the linen and wood. As the actor moved slowly across the stage in his high platform shoes and his brightly colored flowing robes, his gestures were grand, slow, and deliberate, designed to be seen clearly from the farthest edges of the stone seats. But the performance was never silent. It was constantly supported by a thick, rhythmic layer of sound that was both haunting and deeply hypnotic. In the orchestra, the circular dancing floor at the base of the stage, the chorus continued its vital, ancient work. They were the soul of the performance, a group that was neither the lead actor nor the passive audience, but a living bridge that connected the two worlds. Accompanying their songs was the constant, rhythmic resonance of the aulos, a double-reeded flute that produced a distinct, haunting, and nasal sound that seemed to vibrate in the very chest of the listener. The music of the aulos enhanced every single moment of the drama. The rising, cold suspense of a coming storm. The deep, heavy sorrow of a fallen hero. Or the wild, chaotic triumph of a god's return. The human voice, trained for years to project and resonate, rang out over the rows of stone, joining with the flute and the rhythmic, unified chanting of the chorus to create a tapestry of sound that was nearly hypnotic in its intensity. The chorus offered a collective commentary on the action, posing deep moral questions and voicing the very thoughts that the characters themselves were often unable or unwilling to speak aloud. If a hero made a fatal, prideful choice, the chorus would whisper their collective doubt in a low, unified hiss. If a god intervened in the affairs of men, the chorus interpreted the divine meaning for the watching community. They were the voice of the people, the voice of the gods, and the collective voice of the conscience, all moving and speaking as one single organism. Even now, as we leave the great amphitheaters behind, and the sun sets slowly over the ancient white ruins of Greece, the influence of this ritualized storytelling continues to echo through the long corridors of time. What began as simple, rhythmic songs to a god of wine and ecstasy became a timeless art form that still dares to ask the hardest, deepest questions about what it truly congalada to be human. The very architecture of our modern theaters, the use of masks in our performance art, and the concept of emotional release, the catharsis that cleanses the soul, all find their deep roots in those open-air theaters carved into the hillsides. So very long ago, the story, the mask, and the chorus does not end with a closing curtain, for there were no curtains then. It ends with an echo of sound that travels across the millennia, reminding us that our suffering and our joy are universal, shared experiences. We are all participants in this grand ancient design, witnesses to a drama that is as eternal and as rhythmic as the stars circling above. The voices of the past are never truly silent. They are simply waiting, patiently, for us to listen in the deep quiet of the night. As the music of the aulos slowly fades into a gentle rhythmic hum, we drift deeper and deeper into the stillness of our own sanctuary. We are carried by the rhythmic memory of 1,000 voices, speaking as one, a many-voiced harmony that blankets our minds in peace. There is only the peaceful, unbroken echo of the dark, and the knowledge that the story continues, even while we sleep. We move now away from the stage and back toward the protective embrace of the earth, as the cycle of history prepares for its next quiet turn. As the rhythmic chanting of the ancient Greek chorus fades into a soft, distant hum in the back of your mind, we leave the open-air amphitheaters of the Mediterranean behind and travel forward through the velvet mists of time, returning once more to the heart of Paris. But we do not find the city in a state of celebration. Instead, we arrive in the dark, uncertain days of June 1940, a moment when the world seemed to be fracturing, and the shadows of conflict were stretching long across the European continent. Paris was falling under occupation, and the swastika flew ominously from the heights of the Eiffel Tower. In the center of this gathering storm stood the Louvre, the crown jewel of French heritage, a building filled with the concentrated soul of centuries. It was vulnerable, exposed, and filled with priceless treasures that the world could not afford to lose. Yet, as the city prepared for the arrival of heavy foreign boots, a quiet and invisible mission was already unfolding behind the grand, heavy doors of the museum. The Louvre was not caught off guard by the approach of the darkness. Long before the first soldiers ever entered the city, a secret and meticulous plan had been set into motion by those who truly understood the weight of the objects they guarded. While the world outside was loud with the chaotic machinery of war, the interior of the museum was a place of focused, rhythmic, and incredibly quiet activity. Thousands of masterpieces, the very breath of human civilization, were being prepared for a journey into the deep shadows of the countryside. Imagine the scene within those vast marble galleries, usually filled with the echoes of thousands of footsteps, now eerily quiet and still. The only sounds are the soft, repetitive thuds of hammers on wood and the dry rustle of protective straw as it is packed around ancient stone and canvas. The Mona Lisa, the Venus de Milo, and the winged Victory of Samothrace were carefully, tenderly removed from their pedestals and their walls. They were placed into custom-built wooden crates, padded with velvet and history, and prepared for a clandestine evacuation. This was the largest museum evacuation ever attempted in the history of the world, a logistical ballet, conducted under the cover of a pitch-black night and a heavy, protective veil of secrecy. Convoys of trucks, disguised and moving without lights, carried away the nation's soul, moving the treasures to remote, forgotten castles, quiet abbeys, and humble rural estates scattered across the deep, sleeping French countryside. Picture the Mona Lisa, that enigmatic and ancient smile tucked away in the complete darkness of a wooden box, traveling along winding, moonlit roads far from the reach of those who sought to claim her as a trophy. As the trucks moved through the rhythmic, rolling landscape of the countryside, the treasures were constantly shifted from one hiding place to another to evade detection, moving like ghosts through the forest. By the time the occupation forces arrived to inspect the Louvre, they found the great galleries hauntingly, beautifully empty. All that remained were a few decoy paintings, rows of empty frames hanging like open windows into a lost world, and a skeleton staff that refused to speak of where the true beauty had gone. The true reveal of this story is not found in the strength of an army or the power of a king, but in the quiet, fierce, and selfless determination of the curators and art historians who stayed behind in the shadow. They were the true guardians of beauty. These were not warriors in the traditional sense, They were men and women of books, of soft brushes, and of deep memory. They risked their lives every day, faking complex documents, forging shipping orders, and misleading the occupiers with a calm and steady grace to protect the hidden collections. Some of them joined the resistance, while others spent their long, cold nights in damp cellars, ensuring that the temperature and the moisture of the earth did not damage the delicate, centuries-old canvases they were sworn to protect. The Louvre, though silenced and occupied, was never passive. It had become a secret cultural battlefield, a sanctuary where the spirit of humanity was being kept alive in the dark. This is the very essence of safety, the knowledge that even in the darkest, coldest hours of history, there are always guardians watching over the things that truly matter. It is a soothing, rhythmic truth that we can carry with us into sleep, that beauty can be hidden. It can be tucked away for a time, but it can never be truly destroyed as long as there are those willing to remember it. As the years of conflict eventually began to fade, the museum endured. When Paris was finally liberated in the warm, bright August of 1944, the defenders of the Louvre emerged from the shadow. One by one, the great works began their slow, triumphant, and rhythmic journey back home. The trucks returned to the city, the heavy wooden crates were opened with gentle and trembling hands, and the masterpieces were restored to their quiet marble halls. Some had suffered in the humidity of the remote countryside, but the spirit of the Louvre had survived the storm. If you were to walk through those silent galleries today, you could still feel the weight of what was almost lost or lingering. Peaceful silence that speaks of the deep, protective love that kept these treasures safe through the night. The galleries are once again filled with a soft, natural light, and the marble floors are once again polished to a rhythmic shine, welcoming the world back into the sanctuary of the human spirit. We find a profound and lasting peace in this cycle of loss and restoration. It reminds us that whether it is the golden legacy of Eleanor's bloodline weaving its way through the royal houses of Europe, or the first emperor's vision of an eternal, underground empire guarded by clay and silver, there is a singular thread that connects them all. It is the human desire to preserve something of ourselves, to build a fortress for the soul that the passing of time cannot erode. Eleanor's golden thread and the emperor's rivers of mercury now merge into a single, shimmering, and hypnotic stream of history that flows through the heart of our memory. As we drift further and further into the absolute stillness of the night, we see the stones of the Louvre and the clay of the silent soldiers as part of the same grand protective design. Everything that was once hidden is now safe, and as the past settles around us like a soft, velvet blanket, we prepare for the final turn of the wheel. The guardians have done their work, the treasures are home, and the world is at rest. We move now toward the final chapter, toward the end of our long journey, where the stories of queens and emperors dissolve into a deep, dreamless peace. The lights in the marble halls are growing dim. The rivers of mercury are still, and as we drift, we carry the warmth of this safety with us into the long, quiet, and beautiful night. Everything is as it should be. The treasures are safe, and you are safe to drift. As the world around you continues to soften, and the very air in your room becomes heavy with the profound promise of rest, we travel to our final destination, a place of absolute, enduring, and sacred stillness. We find ourselves in the quiet, cool heart of the Loire Valley, within the ancient, hallowed walls of Fontevraud Abbey. Here, the light filters through the high, arched windows in long, dusty beams of pale gold, illuminating the very place where Eleanor of Aquitaine was finally laid to rest. She passed away on the 1st of April, 1012 at the remarkable age of roughly 82. A life that spanned nearly a century of radical change, conflict, and soaring ambition. She lies here now, in the same quiet monastery where she spent her final contemplative years, no longer a queen of nations or a commander of armies, but a sovereign soul at total peace. If you were to stand beside her tomb in the deep silence of the abbey, you would notice something profound in the way she chose to be remembered for eternity. She's laid to rest beside the powerful men who defined so much of her physical life, her husband, King Henry II, and her beloved son, Richard the Lionheart. But while they are depicted as warriors, frozen in stone with the symbols of their earthly power, Eleanor's image tells a different, softer story. The statue atop her tomb does not show her clutching a royal scepter or wearing a heavy iron-reinforced crown. Instead, she is carved in stone holding a book. It is a quiet, eternal testament to her intellect, her deep, rigorous education, and a lifelong love of learning that guided her through the violent storms of two kingdoms. In this silent, echoing abbey, we see the true victory of the Queen. She did not merely survive the Crusades, the political exiles, and the 16 long years of imprisonment. She outlasted them all. She wore each of her titles Duchess, Queen, Prisoner, Regent, and Diplomat like a suit of protective, golden armor. But underneath that armor was always the sharp, restless mind of a thinker and a master strategist. She proved to the world that in an age built for the raw physical power of men, a woman could claim her place through the sheer force of her will and the brilliant clarity of her mind. Her legacy is not found in the crumbling castles she once ruled, but in the very idea of female agency that she embodied centuries before the world was ready to understand it. As the shadows lengthen across the abbey floor, we realize that history is not just made of cold, gray stone or faded, dusty scrolls. It is a golden thread, long and unbroken, that runs through the entire tapestry of the human experience. Eleanor's thread is woven deeply into the lineage of monarchs and the evolving, shifting shape of Europe itself. It is a thread that connects the glittering, loot-filled courts of her youth to the secret, dark tunnels beneath the Louvre and the silent, clay ranks of the army in unwind. We find ourselves now in a vast mental memory palace, a place where every story we have covered tonight remains in quiet, eternal witness. The warriors in the dark, heavy earth, the kings in their stone fortresses, and the queen with her book all occupy the same sacred space of remembrance. There is no more conflict here, no more restless ambition, and no more noise. There is only the rhythmic, peaceful breathing of history. The images of the day are beginning to blur, losing their sharp edges as they fade into the soft, velvet darkness of your room. The stone of the tomb, the clay of the soldier, and the silk of the banner are all dissolving into the same quiet, dreamless state. You are detaching now from the physical world, letting the weight of the centuries carry you deeper and deeper into a state of abstract, total peace. The book is closed, the stone is still, and you are ready to drift into the long, beautiful silence of the night. The great amphitheater is empty now. The echoes of the songs have vanished into the cool night air, and the actors have departed the stage, leaving only the stillness of the marble and the distant stars watching from above. The long journey through the corridors of time has reached its natural, peaceful end, and the world has returned to a state of utter, perfect stillness. You have traveled very far tonight from the sun-drenched plains of Aquitaine to the secret, silent vaults of the Louvre, and from the buried, silver-rivered empires of the East to the sacred rituals of ancient Greece. As you lie here in the safety and the warmth of the present, Realize that you are no longer just an observer of these ancient tales. By listening, by remembering, and by drifting, you have become a part of the very history you just heard. These stories now live within you, settling into the quiet, protected corners of your mind as you prepare for deep, restorative rest. You are now the keeper of the golden thread, the one who carries the memory of the queen and the guardian of the silent clay army. There is a profound, hidden cycle in the darkness as you drift toward the final edge of sleep. A quiet promise takes root in your subconscious. When you wake tomorrow, refreshed, renewed, and full of light, you will carry with you the wisdom of queens and the enduring, unbreakable strength of the clay warriors who have stood watch for 2,000 years. You will move through your own world with the strategic grace of Eleanor and the patient, silent resolve of the guardians. And when the sun sets once again and the shadows return to your room, this sanctuary of sound will be waiting for you. We will return to the mists of the past together, uncovering new secrets and finding peace in the rhythmic, eternal flow of time. But for now, there is only the silence. The theater is dark, the rivers of mercury are still, and the book remains at rest. Feel the deep, heavy calm of the night enveloping you like a protective, velvet blanket. You are safe, you are at peace, and you are exactly where you need to be. Good night. Good night.